So, the fifth lecture is on hydrosocial. As I had mentioned in the fourth lecture, that hydrosocial is a particular theoretical framework, an emerging theoretical framework within political ecology of water, and it advances political ecology of water by conceptualizing a kind of a cyclical, relational, dialectical relationship between water and society that I would be explaining in the next couple of slides. So, yes, so the global water system project, it recently mentioned that human beings, they are increasingly intervening with the basic pattern and with the basic character of the water cycle. So, now water cycle has to be understood as an integration among or across the physical, biological and biogeochemical and human components. Okay. So, the water cycle is no more a water cycle, but rather it has become what can be called as a water system, because as I mentioned that it is an integration between or among biological, biogeochemical, physical and human components. So, that makes the water cycle to an extent transform into water cycle. So, what is this water system? Sorry. So, what is this water system all about? The water system it presents and represents the very nature of water, and this nature we have to understand that this nature is highly complex and it is evidently social. So, but the one important problem associated with water system is that it presents humanity not as a differentiated not as a differentiated entity, but rather an undifferentiated entity and a disaggregated abstraction. So, what is the problem associated with this? So, it fails to understand that humanity actually represent differentiated a differentiated entity, because there are of course whole lot of differences between the water rich and water poor. Rather, there is the prevalence of water rich and water poor. So, this kind of an idea water system has not been able to arrive at. Now, with this, if we come to the next picture, this is a picture very interesting a figure drawn by Kate Ely. A renowned hydrologist who is working with the confederated tribes of the Umatilla Indian reservation on the banks of the Columbia River across the states of Washington and Oregon, and she is extremely aware of the disposition of water rights by the Umatilla tribes, and she also knows about the recruitment of the Columbia River into global flows of capital. So, this diagram is all about how water flows to money. So, she says, and the political ecology perspective of course appreciate this kind of a statement, that water does indeed flow uphill to money. So, with this we come to the hydrosocial cycle. So, hydrosocial cycle, as I had mentioned earlier, that it is it's a further step from the political ecology of water framework that actually discusses the dialectical, relational, cyclical relationship between water and society. Jessica Buds and Jeremy Linton, they have come up with a very interesting and comprehensive definition of the hydrosocial cycle. So, they say that it's a social natural process by which, so all these words in this definition are extremely important. So, they say that it's a social natural process by which water and society make and remake each other over space and time. So, the hydrosocial cycle is all about how water and society makes and remakes each other, make and remake each other over space and time. So, we can understand that they are trying to, so this particular cycle it's trying to come up with the argument, or it's trying to show and indicate, portray and illustrate that how water shapes, and in turn it gets shaped by social power structure, by technology infrastructure, and by the materiality of water itself. So, this cycle, it really talks about how water shapes all these things, these entities, these components in the whole process, and how water in turn gets shaped by all these processes. Yes, so we had discussed about the Hortonian hydrological cycle in our second lecture on beyond hydrology. Now we are discussing how the transformation today is taking place in social science circle from hydrology to the hydrosocial. So, Gleek mentions that this hydrological cycle, it's actually it's an old water paradigm which used to give a whole lot of emphasis on the state, on the role of the state, because hydrological cycle, we had seen that how Karan Becker had associated the had said that this hydrological cycle also to a great extent it led to the formulation of what he called the state hydraulic paradigm. So, in this hydrological cycle, the role of the state had been emphasized like anything, but today we find a kind of a discursive shift from water management to water governance, which and this makes us aware. So, we become more aware, we come to realize about the entanglement of water with broad range of social stakeholders within and this broad spectrum where water has, or water is deeply related, or water is deeply associated with social stakeholders across different sections of the society. So, what happens is that so the Global Water Council has recently pointed out or recently mentioned that today water is everybody's business. We can't deny that water is or we should not think that water is restricted only to the domain of the state, but today this discursive transformation had taken place, where we have to understand that water has become business of everyone, everybody, within a wide spectrum or within a wide range of social relationships. So, this is another interesting concept or conceptual formulation by Eric Singadou. So, Eric Singadou had done his research on Guayaquil, Ecuador, and he had written number of papers and books on socio-nature and on hydrosocial, on urban political ecology, etc. And Singadou had made exciting advances in this particular field, because he talks about the hybrid nature of water and the hybrid nature of the relationship between water and society. So, he says that the processes of the he says that the processes or the components in the process, that is water and social systems or water and social power, these are related, but this relation is not external, this relation is rather internal. So, this is most important, because by saying that water and society, by saying that water and society are related internally, Singadou tries to emphasize on the hybrid relationship between water and society, which has also come out well in this particular illustration, where Singadou has focused on the production of socio-nature. So, what happens here is that he considers the components in this process not as separate entities or pre-given entities that fall within the realm of either water or society, but rather these two are the relationship are embedded. So, the relationship is absolutely internal, and the relationship is embedded, and that we can understand through the use of the concept of hybrids. So, this is a hybrid relationship between there is a hybrid relationship between water and society. So, he explains that so the relationship is not between things. So, we need to understand that water and society, there is no it is not an external relationship between water and society. So, it is not a relation between things. That for example, that might explain the impact of human society on quantity of water, or for that matter quality of water, but rather there has to be a transformation in our thinking, where we should think that this relation has evolved from relation between things to relation constituting things, such as the political, economic and cultural processes, that actually determine and define the particular nature of particular instances of water, like drinking water, like desalinated water, like groundwater, like different other waters. So, water is not water is explained as different waters. So, this is also another advancement in the understanding of water within the political ecology framework, where the scholars, they try to focus on different instances or different waters, rather than conceptualizing water as a homogeneous entity. So, this can be explained by some examples that I will like to draw your attention on now. So, for example, I will try to give some examples on dam, on like desalinated water plant, on groundwater, etc. So, let us first focus on dam. Now, let us just think, like the water that is held in place behind the dam, is it simply H2O that can be measured by cubic meters, and that falls through the penstocks and turbines to generate hydroelectricity? So, is it simply H2O, or there are very important other parameters, other factors, other complex processes that are embedded, that are inbuilt in this whole thing, that actually determines the functioning of the dam, its impact on society, and vice versa. So, this is the big question that we really need to ask. So, is water that is being held behind the dam, it is simply H2O or not? The answer is of course not. Why? Because like the water that is held in place, it is being done by the state run utility. There are other things, like for example, abstract hydrological calculations involved in the whole process. There is human labor that had been extracted, for this for the construction of these turbines or the penstocks and so many other components of this large and huge big infrastructure. So, there are other things like, for example, construction consortiums. There are water management protocols, and there are also strong discourses of national identity associated with the construction of, or with the production of hydroelectricity. So, we need to understand that all these important components or all these important components within this process, they play very important role, and they are internally related to each other, that affect the functioning of the dam, and that also consequently affect the functioning of the dam on society and vice versa. So, hydrosocial cycle, when if you apply the hydrosocial lens, if you apply the political ecology or the hydrosocial lens to understand the functioning of a dam, you will be able to capture these complexities, which are otherwise which are otherwise remain ignored or remain missing in the mainstream narratives. So, now I would like to give an example on desalinated water. So, desalinated water also, if we if we perceive desalinated water, if we try to understand desalinated water by looking into or looking through the hydrosocial lens, then we will understand that it is a particular instance of water which is produced in a set of relations involving seawater, involving the technological configurations, involving international trade, and also involving flow of capital and flow of energy. So, all these things are involved in this process, and so it is not a linear simple process, but rather a complicated one. So, now if I give an example, for example, like what happened in Peru was that a particular mining company, it came up with a proposal for water swap. That is, it wanted to extract water from the Andes, from the upstream Andes, and that water would be used by the mine for industrial output. On the other hand, it suggested that as it would be drawing water from the Andes, so what it can do is that it can provide desalinated water in a downstream town. Now, the question is whether the people people living in Peru, they actually accepted the proposal of the mining company or not. The answer is no, they did not accept the proposal of the mining company, because there were also severe protests by the civil society organization, and very interestingly, one particular civil activist, he said that this particular mining company is trying to replace, now this is very important, they are trying to, he said that they are trying to replace our live waters, our live mountain waters with dead desalinated waters. So, the question is, what is at stake here? Is it water that is at stake, or is it desalinated water? That is, so the whole idea is that the politics of desalinated water is very different from other instances of water. So, hydrosocial cycle or hydrosocial lens gives us this particular understanding that how desalinated water it is very different from other water, like other drinking water or groundwater or different other water. How is it different, and how it in turn being different, it also produces different sets of configuration. So, and another thing also is that, like I mean, hydrosocial cycle also makes us aware of the fact that desalinated water, it extracts or rather it exerts and endangers new waterscapes, which new waterscapes, and that actually gets produced and created by transforming economic possibilities, ecological conditions, and also social identities. So, then coming to groundwater, another example. So, again the whole question of like are social processes surrounding groundwater similar to social processes surrounding other sources or other states or other forms of water. So, hydrosocial cycle again it studies the hybrid nature of the relationship, internal relationship between water and society, making us aware that different waters or different instances of water, they actually create different configurations which cannot be fitted into a homogeneous and universal framework and understanding. So, for instance, now if we focus on groundwater, we will be able to understand that groundwater is much more complex, for that matter it is much more complex than surface water. Now, why? Because groundwater it actually remains invisible. So, it is complex because it is invisible, and it is very difficult to measure and assess groundwater by both hydrologists and also the users. So, same example I can give I mean relating to what happened again in Peru. So, what happened is that like so one again one particular mining company, they wanted to extract groundwater from Peru, but the people, again the civil organization, they protested, they rejected the plan of the mining company. So, they accepted the plan of the mining or the proposal of the mining company about using surface water for running their mines, but at the same time they rejected the plan of the company, the mining company, to extract groundwater. So, you can understand that water should not be treated as an undifferentiated or homogenized whole, but hydrosocial lens, the hydrosocial angle make us realize, make us aware about the heterogeneity in water and heterogeneity within the materiality of water. So, and again, if we focus a little bit more on groundwater, we will be able to understand that groundwater it has characteristics that make it either that provoke that provoke users to use it in a more frequent manner, or and that also at the same time provoke user not to use it. So, I am trying to say that groundwater has characteristics that play an important role increasing its demand. At the same time, groundwater has characteristics that can also reduce its demand. So, if I give some concrete examples, like when how I am saying that groundwaters have characteristics that can increase its demand, because the supply is continuous. So, even dry periods, in dry periods there should not be ideally any problem with the supply of water. So, that is an incentive. At the same time, the sediment load also remains low compared to surface water. So, these are the incentives that or these are the rather characteristics that make that actually increase the demand of groundwater. At the same time, the demand can also be reduced, because there are few characteristics that again play an important role in reducing the demand of groundwater. For example, there could be the issue of salinity, right. The water could be saline. In countries like South Asia, for example, in Bangladesh, more specifically India, there is the problem of arsenic contamination in groundwater. So, again that is a kind of a disincentive. Okay. So, that plays a vital role in reducing the demand of groundwater. There might be other factors, like for example, the drilling and the pumping costs might be quite high. So, this could be expensive. So, that would again provoke the users not to use much groundwater. So, that would again reduce the demand of groundwater. So, what I am trying to say is that groundwater has characteristics that at the same time might increase or decrease or reduce demand, and that would consequently have effect, or that would consequently affect the distribution of groundwater among the users. So, and that will create configurations that will be very different from configurations created by surface water, drinking water, desalinated water that we had discussed just before, and also dams. So, hydrosocial cycle, it is very important in the sense it help us get engrossed into and realize the history and the trajectories and the complexities across different instances of water, different states, different forms, different qualities, different quantities of water that make water meaningful and that make water different and distinct from other forms and other states of water. So, coming to the next component within hydrosociality, this is a very interesting advancement that had happened very recently, and I am happy to share that we are involved in this project where we are trying to transform the hydrosocial cycle to what we call hydro sediment social cycle. So, what is happening today is that if you remember the second lecture on beyond hydrology, there I had mentioned that how mainstream water science or modern waters, if you remember that hydrological cycle, how I said that it led to the emergence of modern waters. And modern waters, and during that time 16th 17th century Europe, how separations were effected between land and water. So, all those places which were the marshes, the fens, the boglands, the wetlands, the chores, that is riverine islands, that were not taken into consideration at all, because it was thought by the state, it was understood that these areas or these physical so called physical realities will not be very profitable for the state. because like so the state was interested in the durable landscape, because that would help the state to earn and extract revenue from there in terms of fertility, in terms of agricultural productivity and all that. On the other hand, water, I mean the state was interested in water flows or river flows, because water was important or river was important in terms of trade, in terms of transaction. Okay. So, in that way, like durable landscape and river flows were considered as important, because they would ideally contribute to the exchequer of the state, but all different other forms which are maybe the physical forms which are neither water nor land, which are sometimes water, sometimes land, which are partly water, partly land. And very interestingly, in South Asia, in the global south, in the coastal, estuarine, deltaic regions, these realities, I mean it is so frequent, and it also consists of, or it is thickly loaded with social realities as well. So hydrosocial cycle till now it has actually talked about the relationship between water and society, but unfortunately enough till now it has not been able to include sediments. That is also a very important component within water, especially within coastal, estuarine, deltaic, so called land waterscapes. So, what we are trying to do, or what we have done, is that we are still continuing with the same set of research. So, we have conceptualized a particular term, an interesting terminology, which are called mudyscapes. So, which are neither water nor land, but a combination of both. So, again it will not be quite appropriate to say that mudyscape is a combination of both. Again, so if we use the concept of hybrids, so here land and water they are not separate entities, but rather land and water get entangled. So, again a kind of an embedded hybrid relationship between land and water. So, what we have tried to focus on is not only on the relationship and co-production of water and society, but the co-production of water, mud and society. So, this is the latest development within hydrosociality or the hydrosocial cycle, that how sediment, which is again a very significant component in rivers, especially in its lower stretch, mainly in the deltaic regions. So, how it is also important to include sediments in the hydrosocial cycle, and how that could lead to a transformation in the hydrosocial cycle, or rather an expansion or enrichment of the hydrosocial cycle from hydrosocial cycle to hydrosediment social cycle. And when hydrosocial cycle will actually be expanded to hydrosediment social cycle, we have shown that how we will quickly become aware about all these complexities and all these realities that mudyscapes actually consist of. So, this is the latest development within the cycle itself. A hydrosocial cycle, or a political ecology of water, it has to move towards a kind of an we, or rather all of us we who are interested in studying water, in understanding water society relationships towards the larger goal of sustainable future, or we should move towards agonistic transdisciplinary water research. Now, what is agonistic transdisciplinary water research? So, what is agonistic? Agonistic is striving for an effect. So, there has to be some effect, there has to be the translation of ideas into practices, that is what is required. So, there is a slight criticism that hydrosocial cycle actually does not push a transdisciplinary research. Why? Because still it still does not push a transdisciplinary research program, because the physical actually takes a back seat. So, in that sense a critical physical geography is again emerging as a field which is doing justice to both the physical and the social. So, we will discuss critical physical geography at the end of the course as one of the very viable approaches or frameworks. But for now, if we concentrate on political ecology of water and hydrosocial, we will find that one of the criticism is that the physical is still taking a back seat. So, it is so much loaded and embedded with the social dimensions that I mean there is not much discussion on the physical aspects of water. So, which is actually taking a backseat, and how that is creating some problems for getting a comprehensive picture or getting a larger comprehensive picture about the subtleties of what is actually happening, of the occurrences or the events. So, finally, like another thing is that it said that it creates the perspective for action. So, hydrosociality or political ecology, of course, there is no doubt that it is creating, or it creates the perspective for action, but at the same time it is not radically directed towards concerted action. So, this is what is actually missing. So, briefly, like it is all about like their argument is that the critics or the cynics, they point out that one of the shortcomings is that in political ecology of water is that the intellectual commitment is still very much restricted within this intellectual or the theoretical and academic domain. So, now time is ripened enough that this intellectual commitment has to get translated into a political commitment, and when theories really have to be followed and radicalized into practice. So, we need to think about pathways, we need to think about ways through, we need to chalk ways, come up with innovative strategies through which these intellectual commitment actually can get translated into the political commitment. So, Kruger in 2016 Kruger says, so this is again a comprehensive quote that calls for a movement, for radicalizing river research. So, where he says that like there are so many case studies on the cultural political economy of water knowledge that exist today, but on one hand we need more empirical evidences. So, there should be more and more case studies focusing on how culture, politics and economics have shaped this knowledge, and how at what junctures this could have turned out differently. Again he says, we may thus channel the co-productionist critique productively to bring perspectives, alternative knowledge and implication into water politics where they were not previously considered. So, what he says is that we need to bring these perspectives, we need to make this perspective work. So, somewhere there has to be a translation of theory into practice. So, we need to really not only influence the policy circle, but really need to come up with ways through which things could be implemented into actions. So, that is what it is being suggested. So, in an attempt to counter potential lock into particular water policies and technologies that may be inequitable, unsustainable or unacceptable. So, we have to really come out to devise strategies through which inequitable, unsustainable and unacceptable water use could be addressed. So, it is high time for us to address ecological and social justice by not only formulating theories, but also showing some ways through which these theories could be translated into actions. So, these are some of the references which would be shared. Thank you.